would have said that Donald Trump was president.
The president said that tonight.
He's still researching, whatever that means. Now, Trump wanted last night to be his bombshell moment. That's what he wanted it to be. He wanted all the pomp and circumstance and drama of a speech in primetime and document dump that surrounded it as part of the rollout to reignite conspiracy theories about the 2020 election and justify his plans to question the validity of upcoming elections. That's what that whole thing was all about. Remember that cartoon character, Wile Coyote, showing him on your screen, just in case you don't remember? Okay? He spent every single episode putting together elaborate plans to chase the Roadrunner, tying himself to rockets to finally catch the Roadrunner, and always blowing himself up in the process. It's kind of what happened to Trump. He tried to make last night's speech stand out from all the other times he has falsely cried election fraud by saying that he was backing up the claims with all the declassified intelligence documents he was having released. Well, not only did those documents not prove Trump's allegations, the documents actually seem to disprove a lot of Trump's points. I mean, for example, despite Trump's claims about election vulnerabilities, the intelligence community showcased how vote tabulation systems would be difficult to manipulate on a wide enough scale to compromise election results. Okay, that was in the documents. And despite Trump's claims that China carried out, quote, the largest compromise of election data in history, resulting in China's illicit acquisition of 220 million U.S. voter files, MS Now found that the document showed something considerably smaller, that China had previously purchased, and that's a key part of it, 2020 voter data from 7 states. Yes, you heard that correctly. It turns out China paid for access to publicly available data, just like anybody else, okay? Like every candidate running for office in a state buys the voter file. And of course, there were also other documents reiterating the intel community's consensus that Beijing has not deployed influence efforts intended to change the outcome of the U.S. presidential election. Okay? It's sort of like Wile E. Coyote painting a tunnel on a rock wall only to run into it himself, right? Which he certainly has done. He hurt himself on that one. But not only did the documents Trump released debunk his claim that foreign powers were trying to stop him from being elected, the documents Trump released show that the intelligence community believed that at least one foreign power was actively trying to help Trump get elected. Surprise, everyone! And this won't be a surprise. Just like in 2016, Russia was trying to help Trump win in 2020. A document shows our intel communities believed that Russian actors were circulating fake narratives linking mail-in voting to voter fraud. That document was the National Intelligence Council's assessment of foreign threats to the 2020 election from August of 2020. Trump himself would have had access to it at the time. And maybe most damning of all of it is that the document says that, quote, President Putin and senior Russian officials are overseeing efforts by proxies to spread claims about former Vice President Biden. Specifically claims about President Biden's dealings with Ukraine back when he was Obama's vice president, and about individuals tied to the Ukrainian energy company Burisma. Claims that proxy actors affiliated with the Russian government were advancing with U.S. officials. And gee, I wonder who those officials could be. Now, if you remember, that allegation was the basis of Trump's first impeachment. Trump pressured Ukrainian President Zelensky to announce an investigation into Joe Biden and his son Hunter and the Ukrainian energy company Burisma, while holding up nearly $400 million of military assistance to Ukraine. In other words, Trump certainly seems to fit the description of a U.S. official advancing that false narrative with Russian government proxies. And the documents he himself released show that he should have known Russia was behind that narrative, but he kept pushing it anyway. As much as Trump's speech all blew up in his face last night, as funny as it is to watch him trip into all the traps he set up himself, I think it's important to be clear-eyed about how, even though Trump is a buffoon, he is still trying to assault our democracy. And that is still very dangerous. And I don't just mean dangerous in the sense that he could destroy our democratic republic on top of that. There's also the danger that Trump spreading lies like this puts our nation's election officials in danger. I mean, that's part of it, puts them in danger. And when Trump falsely claims our elections are riddled with fraud, he isn't just lying about the abstract concept of elections generally. He's lying about a system made up of people, a system made up of Americans who volunteer their free time and of public officials who have devoted their entire careers